Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Before we get started, I just have a few short messages. First off, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow and help me get on bigger and better guests. Also, don't forget you can pre-order my book, To the Moon, The GameStop Saga, right now by following the links in the description below. We've also got a few quick sponsors for the show today. Are you bored of TV? Do you like drugs but can't afford them? Are you still paying alimony? Well, maybe it's time to read How to See a Man About a Dog, the collected writings. Get your dose of surreal prose and poetry with this dark comedy collection. How to See a Man About a Dog is a collection of experimental short stories, powerful poems, and pulp fiction prose that will take you on a wild, hilarious, and heartbreaking journey. Surrealist short stories, memoiristic poems, and haunting jokes guide you through the wild imagination of emerging writer Samuel Knox. For the reader looking for a wholly original and experimental mixed media approach to stories, How to See a Man About a Dog is a much-needed fever dream tour de force. How to See a Man About a Dog is a kaleidoscope collage made of equal parts delight and despair. Internationally selling author Samuel Knox blends sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and non-fiction into a single, enrapturing vision of what it means to be human in the modern age. You'll find the ebook on Kindle Unlimited and print copies at Amazon, the Book Depository, Waterstones, and most major retailers. Check out How to See a Man About a Dog now and take a journey through the human experience. It's the month of Halloween, and the witching hour is upon us. It's the perfect time to try out one of the spookiest and most intriguing crime podcasts I have ever come across. How I Died is a fiction podcast with a full cast of voice actors and high-quality production value. The series follows John Spacer, who moves to the small town of Springfield, albeit a much less yellow or cheery version of The Simpsons' hometown, and is confronted with a case he's not so sure he can handle on his own. A woman found dead with her husband and child both missing. In episode 1, John begins to hear the voice of the dead woman on his table, and he talks to her as he deciphers just how she might have died. No one knows about John's gift, and he has to hide it from his boss, an untrusting sheriff who is always looking over his shoulder. The first 2 seasons of the show are available on all podcast apps, but be warned, these stories are not for the faint-hearted. The series is for adult audiences, covering topics of murder, threats of violence, and stalking. How I Died has passed over 1 million downloads since its launch, with a vibrant community, all trying to solve mysteries along with the show. So that's How I Died. Find it wherever you get your podcasts and see if you can solve the mystery before it is too late. Links for everything will be in the description below, so check them out and then please enjoy the podcast. Hi everyone. Unfortunately, we lost the first couple of minutes of recording due to streaming problems. However, all you missed was an intro with me saying, "Welcome to the show, Dr. Thornhill," and then him introducing himself as an expert in the concept of parasite-stress, which essentially suggests that the higher the level of infectious disease in a country, the more likely they are to trend towards right-wing authoritarianism. It's a fascinating concept and should really be closely looked at in the current situation that we're living under. So, enjoy the interview.
Very localized. You can even get different strains of TB in different neighborhoods in Morocco, for example. You get different strains of leishmaniasis in different villages that are even a few miles apart and so forth. So you get this localization of infectious disease, which means that you're relatively immune to the local diseases, but not the diseases from the outside. Hence, xenophobia protects you from those diseases on the outside. Ethnocentrism is important because you have all this localized social support and so forth, strong social support that is important for dealing with infectious diseases when they come. And philopatry is important because you just stay home. You're not encountering new habitats and distant places and so forth that will have diseases that you're not immune to. So the parasite-stress theory of values is very fundamentally attached to our knowledge of how host parasite infectious diseases work. So that's the core of the theory, and we've tested the theory in a number of ways. It is now a big research area in lots of places across the world, and I'm extremely excited about that. Other scientists have picked it up. They're looking at spin-offs, new ideas, applications. It's just a very, very exciting time for this theory. But the tests we started out with are as follows. So you take infectious disease levels across regions. Mm-hmm. So we did countries first. And country data for infectious disease you get from World Health Organization and organizations like that to track infectious disease levels all the time. And infectious disease levels are quantified in two ways. You have number of infectious diseases in a region, say a country. You have the prevalence of the infectious diseases. And those two variables are almost perfectly correlated. So more infectious diseases in a country, the more people have those infectious diseases in that country. So those data were available for basically all the countries of the world. There are about 200 countries of the world. So we took the data from the infectious disease and then look at the data that political scientists and cross-cultural psychologists have published in the literature on core values in the countries. And prediction, of course, is that more infectious disease, more conservatism across countries. And that's indeed what we found. Then we started looking at this U.S. state level. And there are good data for infectious disease from the Centers for Disease Control. They keep data on infectious disease levels in all the states of the U.S. And so we looked, and their literature, in the literature, their data on core values of people across the states of the U.S. So the 50 states. And again, the prediction is as infectious disease increases across the states, you get more conservative people, and that is true. So those kinds of predictions we looked at. Then pretty quickly after we published our initial stuff in the scientific literature, experimental psychologists got on the parasite stress theory, looking at it and taking it into the laboratory. And they showed that you can take people and bring them into the laboratory and show them a series of slides, visual slides that have immediate disease threat in them. So have a person with skin pox, face of a person with skin pox, a dirty toilet, a person sneezing, those kinds of things. There are 10 slides that comprise that group of slides that are used experimentally. And when people see these slides, they immediately become more conservative. You measure their values before you show them the slides, you measure their values after the slides. So the shift in values is immediate, and the people get more xenophilic. They get more introverted. Introversion is a component of personality that's part of this system we're talking about too. So you can think of it as people have two immune systems. You have the classical immune system, which is the T cells and the thymus and the spleen and those sorts of things that you learn about in immunology class at university. Classical, that's the first part of the immune system that was discovered by biologists and has received the most attention. But we also have the behavioral immune system in people. And it's the psychological and behavioral mechanisms by which we detect, avoid, and manage infectious disease. And here, values are part of the behavioral immune system. Disgust is an important emotion in the behavioral immune system and so forth. But values are part of the behavioral immune system. So, and in aspects of personality as well. So introversion is protective. It's social caution. Introversion is social caution. And you're very cautious about who you interact with. You're careful. Extroverts, I interact with everybody. And that's extroversion associated with liberalism, introversion with conservatism. So the people looking at these slides, they're shifting to more xenophobia. They're shifting to more introversion and less openness measure that. Openness to new ideas and so forth is reduced too, just upon seeing these slides. New research going on now is looking at, you just take people and you give them a fake news clip that talks about COVID being really prevalent in your region, in your city, and so forth. That causes these same psychological shifts we're talking about toward more conservatism. So we're very, very sensitive to information in the environment about infectious disease, and it shifts our values. With regard to the lab stuff I mentioned, where you take people in, you show them the slides, conservatives, people who measure conservative up front at the beginning, shift more to these disease threats than do people who measure liberal at the onset. So the conservatives are very, very sensitive. And conservatism is, it overshoots, it generalizes adaptively. That is, we say it accepts a lot of false positives adaptively. So anything that is different from the usual for highly conservative people will be seen as bad, something you want to avoid.
Okay.
And basically, yeah. So people that are obese, people that are too skinny, people, mentally ill people, homosexuals, those kinds of biases that conservatives have is all coming out of this overgeneralization of the behavioral immune system to cues that are just different than what you usually encounter, and hence potentially dangerous. So acceptance of false positives adaptively. So that's the theory and some of the stuff going on. I mean, the traditional tests and even some current tests are going on. People are looking at infectious disease levels with COVID and voting partisanship, so political partisanship. Nice work from Poland, a lot from the US with the 2016 election and so forth. Support for, proportion of votes for Trump, say, in the 2016. That's highly correlated, even at the county level. So they're not only doing states now, they got disease data at the U.S. county level, which is nice because you got such a big sample. You got 3,200 counties in the U.S. So you got data on infectious disease in the county, and you got proportion of people that vote for Trump. And of course, the more infectious disease, the more support Trump got. There's a recent stuff. France elections recently after COVID started. And more COVID problems, more support for conservative French politicians. And Poland too. There's a nice study recently published. So all that's going on. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, you've done a fantastic job there of kind of summing up a lot of your broader work. Obviously, it's your work. You've been talking about it for a while, so I'm sure you're well versed in it. So a couple of the things that I wanted to try and get through here and parse out basically is first up. So I'll give you a couple of sort of points that I'd like to ask about, and then because I think they fit together here. So the first is this idea that the collectivist sort of definition here, you're in this there's a crossover between collectivism versus individualism, and your assessment of left versus right. Right. Okay. So the thing that is really baffling me about this, right, is that I was trying to think about this on the 3-dimensional political compass. So I think I've got it here. Okay, here it is. So basically, you've got authoritarianism at the top, sort of libertarianism at the bottom, right and left. So I was kind of imagining, for at least me, that your theory suggests that people will move sort of towards the top right of the political compass, as they are, as there's more parasite stress, so that they're becoming both more right wing in a sense and more sort of authoritarian and collect. And so
absolutely.
So it's
I
like
should have mentioned that authoritarianism, according to much political science data, is a basic component of conservatism. So it is, a foundation of conservatism. And the way it works is it comes out of this traditionalism, respect and love of traditionalism. So you like traditional authority. So you like religion, lots of religion, lots of respect for parents, and traditional government. So the authoritarians will, if they've got a real, conservative government, they really are supportive of that. You saw that. We've seen it in the United States. And it's being studied a lot now. All the authoritarians following Donald Trump's ideas and so forth. Mm-hmm. And you go all the way back to even more extreme events like the history of Nazism in Germany, and fascism in Italy, fascism in Japan. Those arose at the same time out of extremely high disease levels associated with the Spanish flu and so forth. Yeah. And that has recently been studied for Nazi Germany. It's a really cool area of research. So what the folk did was
actually. Can I stop you there, Dr. Thornhill? Because I want to get to that, but I want to start with this other thing first, because I think because that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. So the thing that I'm really interested in. So we talked about this idea that the people are becoming both more right wing and more authoritarian under this under parasite stress, basically.
Yes.
So the first question I had about this was that I'm confused as to how exactly your model applies to the reactions we've seen to COVID, because the people who, so like I was like making notes about your sort of definitions here. So the more conservative people, like they've got a belief in like local, traditional, they're xenophobic,
traditional authorities, and conservative authorities,
neophobic as well. So they're scared of the new. They have a preference for their in-group, and traditionally that would have been the people who would have voted this. To me, like it's a very good definition of, say, like the deep South Christian conservative, or at least like the stereotype of what they would believe, right?
Right.
And on the other side, you've got like the very open, sort of more artistic, liberal side of things that would very much line up with the like left wing,
like new ideas, science, and all that. Yeah,
exactly. So
you got it.
Basically, I'm baffled by because those who would have traditionally been in those categories seem to have completely flipped as a result of COVID. Like it's really confusing me as to like what is causing this, because we've seen those who would have been traditionally on the right and now are very much anti any of the regulations. They don't seem to have like so much fear of COVID, or they don't have so much parasite stress.
Right.
And on the other side, it's like made the left become very concerned about this. And I wondered if you thought that that what it had done would be to redefine those categories in a way for people, because it seems that those who have been in support of like the lockdowns and all the public health measures have become very neophobic. And they've become, in a way, very ethnocentric, but not in like a traditional like race-based sense, but more in like they've become very ethnocentric in their like ideas and like who they want around them. And I wondered if you thought there was like something going on there with COVID, or is this just like another trend that we're seeing kind of overlapping? Because this is just fascinating to me, but baffling at the same time.
Let me tell you how I think it works. So the authoritarianism, the power of authoritarianism is something that is missed in what you're saying, because the authoritarian people will literally follow their leader, their conservative leader over the cliff. And as we saw with Nazi Germany, as we saw with fascist Italy and Japan, and as we saw in the US, for example, with the followers of Donald Trump. I mean, he says there's no big deal with COVID, it's a hoax, hates science, all that kind of stuff. Don't believe those scientists, don't believe it. That's not your source of knowledge. Your source of knowledge is me. And so they, ignore all that. They just follow him. So therefore, he says, if you wear a mask, you're just trying to be PC. So that authoritarian, reverence that authoritarian people have is what is so important in very conservative people, many very conservative people not being interested in vaccination, not being interested in social distancing, not being interested in masking, and those kinds of things. And we're getting that writ large in the United States still. And it's a tremendous health problem that the authoritarianism of Trump and his followers have created for the other people. I mean, the people on the liberal end they're using a different source of knowledge. They're using real knowledge. So what the health experts say and so forth, that influences the way liberal-minded people deal with their everyday life. So social distancing makes a great deal of sense if you got any understanding of science at all. And wearing a mask makes a great deal of sense. Getting vaccinated makes a great deal of sense. And so that's fundamentally at the basis of mention your thing you mentioned there. Yeah.
Right. So there's a couple of things I want to ask about that. So I think I broadly agree with what you've said there. It makes sense, but there's like a couple of things that are in my mind that I'm just thinking about that seem to like contradict that. Perhaps they're sort of you don't think they're relevant but like first was that this phenomenon where the right wing tend to be very anti-lockdown, and that is not just a US based phenomenon. It's not just Trump supporters, because like we have that in the UK. It's the sort of more libertarian right that are opposed to it, whereas it's the left in Britain that tend to be very in favor. And I think that sort of plays out, maybe not to as an extreme an extent as in America, but I think I've seen like that trend appearing in a lot of places. And it's funny there that you mentioned when Trump was saying, "Oh, this is no problem. This is no deal. This is not a big deal." But when then recently he was at a rally and said, "Take the vaccine," he got booed. So I'm just not 100% sold that it's like Trump exactly or following authoritarianism. I guess I'm sorry. Maybe I'm looking for something that isn't there, but I'm looking for an explanation that fits with everything for me.
His authoritarian followers thought at that rally that he had sold out. Yeah. So they knew what was right, what he had always said, and what and now he was going along with the others, the out group. And so libertarianism, though, if you look at political science literature, libertarianism is kind of middle road. It's not, so the values is a continuum from highly conservative to highly liberal, and libertarians more or less will fit right there in the middle. So middle of the so they're certainly more liberal than people on the highly conservative end, but they're not as liberal as the highly liberal people. Yeah, that's where they fit.
Okay. Yeah.
Empirically, that's what their measured values. That's where they fit. Yeah.
Okay.
So their attitude towards some of these things is associated with their conservative parts. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I was curious as to what extent you think this concept of parasite stress is, how much of it is like unconsciously there in our biology, and how much of it is because of how we react to the threat of disease. Because I was like one of the things I was trying to parse out in trying to get an understanding on what we've talked about here was basically that was this a case of parasite stress is only affecting those who are being stressed about, or they're watching the news sources or the public health experts that are telling them, hey, be careful, social distance, etc., etc. And I was wondering if the fact that conservatives were just not paying attention to that in a lot of ways, especially in America where there's such a divided news landscape, is parasite stress also influenced then by like your perception of the prevalence of infectious disease? Like if you didn't know there was infectious disease there, would you still be would you still be affected by this idea or this sort of effect?
Let me go back to one basic about how the psychological mechanisms involved here work, okay, and how they develop. So you got a kid growing up, and the kid is in an ecological setting. He lives in a place that has lots of infectious disease. So the kid will get some of those infectious diseases, and he will get these diseases. His immune system, classical immune system, will be activated, maybe activated a long time. That information is read by the psychology of interest here. So we have these psychological adaptations that are functionally specific to acquiring the values that are suitable for the local level of infectious disease. So if he's growing up under high infectious disease, his immune system history in that ecological setting of high infectious disease is part of the information. Other information is all the lore and so forth about infectious disease. So if you grow up in rural India, you got all this cultural information about infectious disease, what to eat, what not to eat, all that kind of stuff. If you grow up in New Hampshire, you don't have all that infectious disease information and so forth, different culture. So kids grow up under different levels of information about infectious disease, including the information that is part of their experiences with local infectious disease. So that's a big component of the proximate causation of values. So proximate causes are those that act during an individual's lifetime. And I mentioned that it's a scientific theory also about the ultimate causes of our values. But where that comes in is evolution by natural selection, built psychological adaptations that specialize in the acquisition of values that are defensive against the local level of infectious disease. So we have these psychological adaptations. A familiar one is language acquisition. So we have psychological adaptations to acquire language. And we do that as kids. These psychological mechanisms sift all the noise out there, and eventually the kid talks. These specializations we're talking about for value acquisition are specializations for value acquisition, not specializations for language. And so evolution by natural selection has built humans to acquire the values that work against local adversity. If you have high infectious disease, you acquire conservative values. Low infectious disease experiences growing up, liberal values. Liberal values are fantastic for lots and lots of benefits. You have a bigger social group with liberal values. You're bigger mating pool. You're fine with people. You're fine with people who have different values from you, different colors, different ways of thinking. All that stuff for liberals. So there are tremendous benefits, but those benefits are not net benefits under high infectious disease. So you have they're costly under high infectious disease. So that's a little bit more about it. Now, what else do you think I've missed?
So basically, I've been trying to just get a handle on whether, like, if say you took someone out of like a rural country with high infectious disease, like you took them from say like Peru and you put them in rural Canada where parasite stress just is probably not something they're concerned like that there's not having an effect because
you just take them and put them there
so now. say they moved like would that in that moment have it like over say the next couple of years have an effect on how the effects of parasite stress like dissipate? So is it like a totally like where you are, like, because obviously you've mentioned that there's like the ultimate causes and that's the more sort of like beyond the human lifespan sort of time scale that you're talking about here, but
evolutionary history.
But I'm curious as to just how much effect this has upon people.
The implication for your experiment, you take one from a person from Guatemala where there's a lot, infectious diseases or just rains parasites down there, up to say Canada. That's a big change in average infectious, to say the least, because infectious diseases follow the latitudinal gradient so strongly, and diseases like it moist and hot in general. Most of our 1,400 infectious diseases in humans like it moist and hot. So the implication is, yes, that person's values would change. And we know that we can get a person to go more conservative just by showing them 10 slides or making them read a fake news clip about how COVID is. That gets them more conservative immediately. No experiments have been done on the opposite direction. So can you liberalize people by showing them slides of healthy people or something like that?
Clean surfaces.
That hasn't been done. And surprisingly, that research has not been done. Can you shift them the other way? Has not been done. You can shift them to more conservative by showing them immediate disease threats. And those studies were very nicely controlled. It's cool. It's the shifts to more conservative are specific to disease threats. Researchers have used all kinds of other slides that have kind of threats in them and stories about, tornadoes, weather issues, and so forth, threats. The shifts are specific to infectious disease threats that people process and see. And so that's pretty cool. Yeah. So the implication for your imaginary experiments you mentioned is, yes, they would shift.
Okay.
They would shift. So what's going on around the world now with all the COVID, of course, is things are getting more conservative in general.
Yeah.
And, that's going on and being measured and so forth. You have some studies that are coming out now in the scientific literature where you take big samples of people. Much of this is web-based questionnaires and so forth that you can get thousands, hundreds of thousands in some people. And you look at average values of people at the beginning of COVID, and then 2 months later or 6 months later and so forth, increases.
It's
so
like
that's
really, is it really demonstrable? Because I've been also trying to parse out. Yeah.
Demonstrable in the sense of being statistically significant, which is demonstrable in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I like part of me can't figure out, because I've watched the Conservative Party in Britain, for example, poll at 40% plus for the entire length of the pandemic, despite I don't think there's anyone who thinks they did a good job, and yet they're still polling as the largest party. And
Yeah,
I've been like trying to figure that out. Is like, is it because the opposition is so useless, or are we seeing like parasite stress happening in real life where people want because
yeah,
the party is coming along with a lot of what would be very sort of traditional, like right wing strongman kind of policies. Like they're very, very hard on refugees, on migrants trying to come to Britain,
yeah,
just
yeah,
on that sort of like that aspect of things, like the borders thing, which I'm aware is something that's like quite a strong signifier for more right wing political thought. So they're coming along with all that, and
yeah.
it seemed to me like there might be like quite a strong link there. But again, it's difficult to figure out exactly what's influencing what, you know.
Yeah. Well, with regard to immigration and you know, immigrant issues and all that, I mean, you know, there's conservatives that, if highly conservative, just keep them out. Hell, if you have to, kill them. If you know, that highly conservative thing, take the kids away from the parents, and then the parents won't be trying to get to the border, as they tried to do in the U.S. back during Trump. They took the kids away from the parents coming through Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still trying to figure out, you know, put the kids back with parents and so forth. It's a total disaster.
Yeah.
So they'll do anything. Liberal-minded people, in general, if you ask them, you know, about their ideas about how to handle immigration and so forth, they want a more principled, information-based program for doing it, not just those people are subhuman, get rid of them. It's a different way of looking at immigration.
Mm. Mm. I mean,
It's not that liberals, you know, will say just let everybody in. It's a more thoughtful, so to speak,
yeah.
you know, with a more humanistic
Mm.
way.
I mean, it's been interesting watching during the pandemic how the folks, again, who are very open borders have then become the ones who have who have become the biggest supporters of like the public health measures. I find
Yeah,
that this is wonderful and yeah, again, baffling paradox in this that we have like this is what I meant by like this sort of weird flip that I'm looking at, because like traditionally a lot of those markers of left and right political thought are remaining, and like if you look at the border issue like we've talked about here,
yeah,
those who have been traditionally always in support of like open borders and a very humane refugee policy,
yeah,
who would probably be in favor of like the dreamers and things like
yeah.
that. They've
Those are more liberal
yeah,
folks.
yeah. So they've remained like equally open to open borders during this time when they have,
Yeah,
at least in my mind, been undergoing the effects of parasite stress, which seems like it should shift their attitudes on these things, but it doesn't seem to be in a way. Do you know what do you see what I'm trying to
well, you
get at?
have to. Yeah, actually, Josh, with that kind of stuff, you have to measure it, and political science, and you know, emphasize it. You can't necessarily tell what a person values are until you measure them. So a person will say, I want this and that, and I'm highly liberal and so forth. But unless you measure that person's values using their procedures and so forth, you just don't know.
Mm.
And countries are the same way. I mean, you know, China claims it's a democracy, and
Yeah,
and various countries in Africa claim to be democratic republic of this and that, and they have no idea what democracy is.
yeah.
And you know, so you have to really measure it. And the information that I mentioned briefly, the studies that are coming out where you are measuring big samples of people. Now, nothing has been done in the UK per se in this regard,
Mm-hmm.
but most of it's US based still. But people are getting, in general, more conservative, and so I would be very surprised if that's not the case in those people you're talking about. If you measured their values, say, a year ago and now, there would be a shift, regardless of what they say about immigration.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like even just personally, I can't tell where if I've shifted. It's interesting when you try and apply this to like your own philosophy
Yeah,
because
right.
I find myself listening to, or at least not dismissing in the same way that I would have a lot of right wing commentators over the past
Yeah,
year. But I can't tell if that's just because like the ones who I would have previously listened to, I don't know, I'm not having the same respect for, or because I don't feel like I've changed my
well,
values.
yeah, my guess of you is that you're an open-minded individual, so you're looking for information. And with highly conservative people, it's black or white.
Mm,
There's, I got this way of thinking. It's the way my granddaddy thought and all that kind of stuff. And that's all I worry about. I don't want to hear anything new.
mm.
You're gathering information, and because of the way your value system works. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's partially. I'd say my mum told me this hilarious story about when I was young recently, and she was like, I could never get you to do anything, until I explained why. It's like she always had to
There
reason,
you
even with a 5-year old. She had to explain
go.
why.
That's right. You weren't very authoritarian.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, I don't enjoy being told what to do.
Yeah, authoritarian kid would say, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, just do it. Just do it.
Yeah, but
Don't
maybe.
question the preacher. Don't question mom and dad."
I
Go
mean,
for it.
maybe
Don't-
that's why. Parents like fantasize about when they see, I don't know, like little like Asian children or Indian children. They always seem to be really well behaved, or at least in the
Yeah,
stereotype. Maybe that's
they
what
are.
it is. Like they literally like from like a value standpoint are more inclined to be, yeah, more receptive to parental authority. I hadn't even considered that.
Absolutely. Sure.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, absolutely. More parasites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was curious about was I've listened to a fair few interviews recently about this idea of ideas and concepts as a virus. So the like Gadsad sort of talked about it as like a, where was it, the parasitic mind.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of crossover in the even just the terminology used here,
Yeah.
especially when you talk about like the digital world and how ideas can spread virally, literally
Yeah.
using the same word. I was curious as to whether you thought that there was, this could be an absurd assertion, but whether you thought there was any possibility that like ideas or that seemed like dangerous viruses to people could then be seen to induce a level of parasite stress if they thought that the ideas were dangerous enough, especially when you look at like the poll in America that shows that like both sides of the political aisle see the other as like an existential threat to the country.
Yeah. Let's see. We have to get, I want to get basic with that. So the mind virus concept is kind of a spin-off or development of an idea that a colleague, Richard Dawkins, developed a long time ago. He's a British evolutionary biologist. You know that name,
Mm-hmm.
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, I'm reading one of his books at the minute.
Yeah. Came up with, he called it the meme concept. So this idea that idea will come along and people will grab it, and it just, that's all. And it's just a popular idea, and it will spread from head to head and head to head. And it has properties of the evolutionary process, he claimed. But the modern view of how the mind works is contrary to all that. And the modern view of how the mind works is that our mind is built like the rest of our body, a bunch of specialized adaptations. The mind's adaptations are for acquiring information and using information that at least ancestrally promoted survival and reproductive success, and just doesn't take in any old idea. So our mind acquires information strategically. And that's what I was emphasizing with regard to values and with everything else. And that's the way our minds work. So the mind virus, we can just pick up anything and it'll spread, is not a current concept of the mind.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
No, it was just something that I'd come across. I was curious as to whether, yeah.
God's is a colleague of mine, and I know he's a friend too. And And he would agree with what I said about the nature of the mind, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had a great chat with Jeff Hawkins about his new theories on intelligence and sort of their new understanding of how the mind works. And yeah, pretty much what you said is that it's a whole bunch of they're called the brain theory of intelligence. So it's like that there's like 1,000 different little brains working everything out.
Yeah, lots of specialized psychological mechanisms that are functionally specific in what they do for us. And the functions had, ancestrally anyway, were associated with survival and reproductive success. Absolutely. And we've done some stuff on intelligence in regard to the parasite-stress theory.
Yeah, that's something actually that I wanted to get into here. So,
good. Okay.
Because so the first thing that I was curious about in there was, so I heard you brought this up in the interview with Dr. Peterson, and you talked about this idea that high levels of parasite stress was correlated with IQ levels, and there was like an implication that it was because the brain is focusing its efforts on the disease, or at least like keeping the disease away, compared to not things. So I basically wanted to try and get you to like unpack that idea and like what's causing that.
Sure, we did a couple of studies published in the literature now, and one at the cross-country level and one at the cross-U.S. state level. And in psychology, the measurement of IQ the study of IQ is a big topic in psychology, has been a long time. So there are data on average IQ across states in the U.S. and across all the countries of the world, basically. And so we reasoned as follows, that if you live in an area of high parasite stress, you're going to have to be putting a lot of tissues and bodily resources into the immune system. Both the classical immune system and the behavioral immune system have got to be good, or you're going to die in an area of high parasite stress. So very strong allocation toward the immune system in areas of high infectious disease. And the immune system is extremely costly, as we say in biology, in terms of tissue and so forth, and to maintain it, to produce it and maintain the immune system. Like to maintain your immune system, you're dealing with about 25% of your energy budget right now. Okay, even though you're well.
Really? 25% of my energy, like of the calories that I like consume,
That's
are
right.
going to my
Calories go into maintenance. Your immune system is everywhere in your body, even in your skin and so forth.
Okay.
Lots of immune system.
Okay, is that why? Sorry, is that why people who are malnourished tend to have a weaker immune system, just because they're not getting the same level of?
It's strongly related to nutrition level, bad nutrition, bad immune system. But on the other hand, the nervous system is also extremely costly, especially in humans. We got these big, huge brains and very complicated neural systems, and extremely expensive to maintain your brain function during this show here. That's 25% of your budget too. For a kid developing, it's like 50% of the energy budget, especially little kids, about 50% of the energy budget, and then all the tissues and so forth that's going into that. So you've got two very, very expensive systems to produce and maintain. You got the immune system and the nervous system. The nervous system quality, of course, affects IQ. And so we reasoned as follows, that under high infectious disease, because it's so adaptive to put a lot into your immune system, that'll trade off with this other very expensive system, the neural development system. So high infectious disease, lower IQ. Low infectious disease, higher IQ is what we predicted. So we took the data from the literature, published literature on IQ across countries of the world and across states in the US, and the infectious disease data, took that and looked for the predicted relationship. High infectious disease, lower IQ, low infectious disease, higher IQ. And that's what we found at both the cross-country and the U.S. state data. And in that, of course, in all these studies I'm talking about, where we do cross or comparative kinds of studies, in our analyses we control for using standard analytical techniques, control for potential confounding variables. So IQ researchers had various ideas about what causes IQ variation, of course. It's a big area of psychology, study of IQ. Mm-hmm. And so we go into the literature and we see what they think is causal and so forth. And we control those variables in our analysis. And the cross-country relationship between infectious disease and IQ is almost perfect. It's like 0.82, and the highest the correlation can be is 1. So, and across states, it's about 0.7. Yeah, there's huge relationships.
That's insane, so, because I think, did you not say that the correlation in between parasite stress and shifting political values was like 0.7? So so it's even more prevalent than that.
Yeah, but 0.7 is huge.
Yeah, yeah.
That's... And with all the confounds, potential confounds, statistically controlled in that too. So yeah.
That's fascinating. So
it is. We were surprised it would be so strong.
Yeah, that's so. Like, is the basic implication then of what we've discussed here is that if you want to liberalize the world, as the idea was through trade initially, like people said that the liberalization of trade, say with China, would open them up and make them more democratic and more like a Western democracy, and then the authoritarianism would collapse. Basically, was the basic theory. And people have often said that you need to give people money to get them out of authoritarianism, or there's loads of different theories about how to liberalize the world, basically, and make it less sort of dictatorial. Like, you're suggesting that one of the best things that could be done in this field is to just make sure everyone has the best level of healthcare.
Well, yeah, among other things. So basically, the most fundamental thing to do if you wanted to liberalize the world, and again, I emphasize, I'm talking from a scientific point of view, so I'm not judging the value system. I'm just telling you what our scientific studies and other scientific studies in this domain indicate is the answer to your question. And here it is. You start off with just liberating people, emancipating people from infectious disease. That's what you do, emancipate people from infectious disease. And this is a good start at that was during the cultural revolution of the 60s and 70s. And that was a Western revolution. And lots of places outside the West haven't gone through one yet because of infectious disease levels are high. But what happened in the West is, and the medical researchers, historians have studied all this a lot, and it's published in the literature and so forth. And we make a big deal of it. And here's what happened. Beginning in 1920 in the West, there was chlorinated water added to, and it spread very rapidly in the West. And that knocked out all kinds of infectious diseases. I mean, that alone caused tremendous increases in longevity, reductions in child mortality, and so forth throughout the West. So that's 1920. Also in 1920, the first food handling laws came, so that all food handling had to be more hygienic and so forth. And that was a big increase in hygiene and reduction of infectious diseases too. Also in the 20s, sewage treatment plants started in the West. This is just Western. Mm-hmm. In the West, sewage treatment plants and indoor plumbing, lots of indoor plumbing And, before people pooping out in the street, in the back alley, and that's, public defecation. But that was going on in the 20s, and all that increased in the 30s. And then in the 40s, after World War II, there was good antibiotics, broad spectrum antibiotics that came along. And again, it changed our world in terms of infectious disease tremendously. And also in the 40s, child vaccination programs started in the West, and requirement that you get the kids vaccinated and so forth. And there was very little opposition to that because the conservatives weren't complaining about it. Conservative leaders weren't complaining about it as they did with the COVID vaccination. Different world with regard to that.
Yeah.
Different world. So all that's going on. And then in the 60s, you had all these liberals in the West, young people that had grown up under relatively low disease levels for the first time in the history of humans growing up. They had good water, clean water. They had hygienic food they could buy at the grocery store. They had sewage treatment plants, toilets, vaccinations, all that stuff. Also in the 40s,
probably cleaner air as well.
Well, yeah, cleaner air. But in the 40s, there was pesticides, good pesticides, chlorinated hydrocarbons, organophosphates that killed a lot of vectors, mosquitoes and so forth. And it wasn't until about the 30s that people began to put screens on windows, so that kept out mosquitoes and so forth. And by the 40s in the United States, mid 40s, malaria was just about gone, where it was a big killer before that.
I didn't even realize that malaria was in the States.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, now it's not endemic here now, of course. You get an occasional person with malaria that's coming in from a malaria place, southern Mexico or various other places. So that, and then you got all those liberals. And what'd they do? They opposed the war, and very anti-authoritarian, to say the least. The hippies and so forth. That whole couple of generations, 20 to 40 years. Human generation is about 20 years. So a generation or two after these health interventions, depending on the particular health intervention, you got all these liberal young people coming along who were against traditional government, against war, all for peace, make love, not war. The sexual revolution was part of that liberalization. The ethnic groups that had been isolated and closeted and so forth began to have rights, and civil rights, feminist movement, all that stuff. Women became real citizens all of a sudden too. It's part of that liberalization. So that's a good test case for what you can do if you emancipate people from infectious disease, if that is your goal. If you want to go back to highly conservative all the way to fascism, extreme conservative, then crank up the infectious diseases out there. Make those poor people live in squalor and so forth, as they do in authoritarian, autocratic governments. Yeah.
So you're saying, then ultimately the that sort of falling apart infrastructure or not so great public health measures or anything like that's part of an authoritarian regime is actually helping to entrench it in a way?
Yeah, it's helping the infectious disease. The way it works is you get with highly conservative governance. We've done a lot with governance variation. Governance, the political science, that's a big area of political science, and governance varies from highly democratic to highly autocratic. And they've measured this. 5 measures of democracy, said differently, of autocracy that political scientists use. They got measured across all countries of the world. And we looked at that in detail. And the more infectious disease, the more autocratic governments are. And the way it works is with highly conservative values, you get this dehumanization of people that are not in your in group. So those people, they can be a different color, they can be identified in various ways, different caste and so forth, but they're not really human, and you don't have to worry about them. So they have no rights, no liberties, no opportunity, no education, and so forth under high autocracy. So that helps the infectious diseases, but it keeps them down there because, they're untouchable and so forth, basically, in all these, India, classical India being a good example of but there are other, I grew up in the old South, and it was a caste system too. It was white, black caste. And the white folks, rich white folks, most of the white folks were poor and considered white trash too under the highly conservative government. But all those out-group people, are just subhuman. We don't worry about them. We don't give them any rights or opportunities or resources and so forth. That's the way autocracy works.
Yeah. Yes, the dehumanization thing is like another thing that I feel like we've been seeing, that this is what brought me to that like idea of the mind viruses like having an effect here, because we've seen both sides of the political spectrum like increasingly dehumanize each other, and it's
still, if you measure it, Josh, the liberals, they're not dehumanizing in the same way conservatives are. It's an entirely different animal.
Yeah, I guess their dehumanization is aimed at different people ultimately.
Yeah.
So I get, that's where the major difference probably is. But anyway, the last thing that I wanted to ask you about was this correlation between Spanish flu deaths and the idea that we were the Spanish flu deaths and like voting for conservative or authoritarian governments in the like sort of 20, 30 years following that, because so you'd mentioned it in terms of Nazi Germany in your interview with Dr. Peterson, and then I was curious as to, because I know he asked about Italy, but I was curious as to whether you had found if there was other data across Europe or anywhere in the world that was affected by Spanish flu as to like that correlation that, in the same way you'd seen it in Nazi Germany.
Not for Spanish flu. I've looked, so Spanish flu levels, with Nazi Germany, it was so cool because they had the Third Reich. For some reason, they collected a lot of data on lots of stuff. And the University of Michigan has these data, and it was by city. So the death rate from Spanish flu in a German city predicted 20 years later, the support for Nazism, the percentage of people that voted for the Nazi party. And that was by city in Germany. There's nothing like that. So Japan was under real high flu levels, Spanish flu levels, as was Italy during the rise of fascism in those places. And Mussolini, for example, he was just like Hitler, a real germaphobe, as was the king of Japan at the time. But
that's stunning that all three of those authoritarian leaders had the same bent.
And all that Spanish flu. And but there are no data like in Japan of different cities and the voting and that kind of thing, nor in Italy like there was in Germany. But Mussolini, he outlawed handshaking. He said it was the most disgusting thing to touch another person's hand. And so he went with the Roman salute. The Roman salute is the Nazi salute, Hitler adopted it too.
So that was Mussolini first.
Disease in Roman. Yeah.
that makes sense actually. The Italian
Yeah,
doing
you
the
bet.
Roman salute, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the nature of that. But this stuff being done now and being published is smaller, but in the same direction. So you just take a bunch of people and you give them a COVID threat. Okay, COVID's rampant in your city or neighborhood or whatever. A lot of increased hospitalization and so forth, and they they support. And you ask them of these candidates here. We've done this in the United States. You got Trump, you got Biden, some Democrats and Republicans, and when they see these threats, when they read these threats, they vote more. They indicate greater interest in conservative candidates. Same sort of thing done in France and Poland recently. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. Like it's
Yeah.
someone left a comment here that Dr. Thornhill is hitting me with some perspective here that my political beliefs possibly have root in enjoying a clean environment relative to previous generations. It's I still can't get my head around this the idea that like you could see it on a city by city level as to the places that got the worst Spanish flu deaths were then the people who were most likely to vote for Hitler. Like
Right.
it's because I studied it a lot. Like I studied Nazi Germany a lot in school just because that
Oh,
was
yeah, it's
our
fascinating. It's fascinating.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
was our
And
curriculum. But this was
yeah.
never Spanish flu was never mentioned.
Yeah. Well, the traditional thinking of political science and so forth about fascism, those fascisms, the big three, at the same time, was that well the economy was bad, people were just desperate, and they bought all that crazy stuff just because they were so desperate. But this German study, the study of Nazi Germany, the rise of Nazi Germany, they had data on employment in all the cities, average employment, average wages, and those didn't predict the vote at all. It had nothing to do with economic level, had nothing to do with variation in economic level, the rise of Nazi Germany.
Like
So those are very
none
cool.
whatsoever.
No relationship with the economic variables that this guy was able to pull from the data set of all those cities. Yep. They also had, well, maybe it was just extremist voting for some reason, some bizarre reason, just going extremist. And the Nazi Party was extremist at the time, but so was the Communist Party, and there were communists on the ticket. Those guys didn't get the votes. It wasn't just an extremist kind of voting pattern that put Hitler in as a king. Yeah.
Because I've seen, yeah.
If you studied Nazism, you know what a germaphobe he was,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's only
Like
from
Trump.
from research. Yeah, that's true. Actually, Trump is like
Yeah.
that too. I hadn't even thought of it in that sense. Like what's interesting there about what you're saying as well is that so a lot of people like the stereotype of the Trump voter was very much like this like poor like backwoods redneck basically.
Yeah.
And I think as far as I'm aware like the data was showing that okay whilst those demographics did vote for Trump that there was also like a very substantial portion of more affluent like sort of upper middle class people that were voting for Trump as well, which is it's really interesting. I would really love can you send me that study so I can link it with the one you were talking about with the sort of state by state analysis of infectious disease and then Trump voters, I think it was, you said?
Yeah. So let's see. The first study of Trump support was done by a magazine, The Economist. Do you guys read The Economist magazine over there? Yes.
Yeah.
It's international. They do a good job. They're interested in data and so forth. And they showed that the first study showed that the Trump support by county, this is U.S., Trump support was associated with low education levels low education levels. Then another follow-up study said, well, what would the parasite-stress theory say about Trump support? And they showed that the sicker the county, the sicker the people were in the county, the more Trump support. And the sicker the county level's illness, there's a outfit at the University of Washington that does every few years they do a county level wellness analysis and so forth. So the sicker the county, the more Trump support. And that's certainly supported by the more recent stuff on infectious disease levels at the county level being associated with Trump support. So although you do get, it's mainly, people living in high infectious disease and without much health care and so forth that are his big supporters, but you do get some middle class people too. Yeah. But more middle class and upper class, more educated people are on the liberal end, Democratic end of things anyway.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of explains like the Kentucky paradox. Like I've seen a lot of people sort of be like, how do Kentucky continue to vote in Mitch McConnell when the healthcare sucks? Like that people are like dying because of the quality of healthcare. I mean, I don't know exactly how accurate that is. I've seen this argument made at least, and it makes a lot more sense.
High infectious disease, in the U.S., well, everywhere in the world, the disease level follows the latitudinal gradient. So the lower the latitude, the more infectious disease. Equator is the worst place for parasitic diseases. And then as you move north and south, either direction from the equator, infectious disease levels go down. So the southern United States has more infectious disease than other parts of the U.S. This is why you had the old South where I grew up, the Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas, Arkansas. Those are the really high infectious disease places still. And the more, they're Trump states. Almost. Yeah.
So, right, this is the last. So then, I'm aware I've taken a lot of your time. I really appreciate the.
Oh, sure. Nice talking with you.
Yeah. So the last thing then I want to ask is something that's just popped into my head here. Is a warming planet that theoretically has more infectious disease than because of the temperature? I've seen there's some talk in the book Cascades, I think it is. No, what is it? The Uninhabitable Earth, and the chapter is called Cascades, and they talk about the diseases and the level of disease that might sort of start to arise because the planet is warming. Yes,
that's scientifically accurate predictions. Yeah.
So is that going to lead to
some regions are going to get wetter too. Some are going to get drier, and drier works against infectious disease, all else equal. But you can get dry areas if the people don't have good sanitation and so forth. Some areas of Iraq, for example, in the desert, the people don't have any plumbing or anything, and so you got high infectious disease. But the wetter and warmer, the more infectious disease. Absolutely. So say if we don't do something about climate change, then in 200 years, you guys will have malaria will be endemic where you're even in Northern Ireland. Malaria will be endemic, and you have hookworm and everything else over there.
Ooh, wow. But so is that paradoxically going to mean as people get more conservative, as there's more parasite stress because the planet warms, that we are going to be less likely to do something about climate change because we're becoming more right wing and more resistant to do it?
Only if people do not take the parasite stress theory of value seriously and see that They've really got to stay on top of infectious disease, or the world is going to turn to crap. Yeah.
Well, that's a bombshell on which to finish things. Dr. Thornhill, I really, really want to thank you for your time. It's been, fascinating to talk to you.
And Josh, tell me, send me an email. Let me know what it is you want me to send you. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm happy to send you whatever you want.
That would be fantastic. I'll send that along. Is there anything you want to plug here for people before we finish up?
Just that after interviews I've done, some people want to contact me and ask me questions and so forth, and that's fine. My email, people can look me up on the internet, of course, and get my email, but I'll say it here. It's rthorn, RTHORN @unm.edu.
Okay, I will put that in the description below for anyone listening, so people can.
And I'm on the internet and all. They can look at my papers and that sort of thing. Read my papers and scientific papers and so forth. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time. And hope everyone enjoyed the chat.
Yeah. You just go to Google Scholar, put my name in, and all my papers are there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do my best to link as many of them as possible for anyone. But
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Randy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget today's sponsor, How to See a Man About a Dog. For the reader looking for a wholly original and experimental mixed media approach to stories, How to See a Man About a Dog is a much needed fever dream tour de force. It combines dark comic short stories, powerful poems, and pulp fiction prose to create a heartbreaking and hilarious journey that readers will not soon forget. Read How to See a Man About a Dog, collected writings for free with Kindle Unlimited, or get it at major retailers everywhere.